In the Gun, episode number 42, Ren Baker speaks. We've got some things to discuss around the WVU program and former Mountaineers and a new league in the well, I shouldn't say in the National Football League, a new professional sports league as well, too, that we want to discuss here on this edition of ITG. Wesley Uhler, Jed Drenning, our third amigo, the Runaway beer truck, Owen Schmitt. He is on assignment for work this week, so no Big O today. He is out UPS trucking.
Last spotted in Logan, right?
He's last spotted in Logan. If you see him, let us know. We'll keep it updated, all right, where the beer truck, the UPS truck was last seen. But Owen on assignment this week, so it'll just be Jed and I for this episode number 42 of ITG. This episode brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline remains your number one source for all your sports betting needs this season. You always find the latest odds, team matchup information, player news, and game trends at BetOnline. BetOnline features live betting, free contests, and live scores for almost any sport or game imaginable. It's the fastest and easiest way to bet all your favorite leagues and events, so head to betonline.ag to join and receive your 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit when you sign up. Make sure to use the promo code Bleav when you sign up to receive your rewards. That's BLEAV. At BetOnline, where the game starts. Speaking of the game starting, Jed, one of the things that Ren Baker discussed was football attendance and how, honestly, if you look at the numbers, that's something that for a lot of schools in the age of, high definition TVs and conference realignment and post-COVID, where people really, for a while there, got used to not going to events as often. It's something certainly the new athletic director at WVU, and I think athletic directors across the college football and college sports landscape are keeping an eye on. How do we keep these fans' butts in the stadiums as opposed to watching on their 65-inch HD TVs in their house?
Well, I think one of the mistakes that was made, and it was talked about at the time, back in the 2020 season when we felt fortunate to even salvage a season at all, right? The COVID year. But one of the concerns was you just touched on the home experience being better than it's ever been. Okay, high def, large screens, you got everything right there. Your kitchen's around the corner, your bathroom's around the other corner. That's stiff competition for the on-site experience, right? Mm-hmm. So when COVID hit, and especially early on, I'll never forget that opener, the COVID season in 2020, seeing it completely empty in the stands, Mountaineer Field. We'll spend another day talking about that, Wes. But what a strange experience that was. And then gradually over the course of time, you started to systematically allow a few more and a few more and a few more. But what happened was, the concern was, with the in-home experience being as extravagant and awesome as it is, and more so than it ever has been, do you really want to force an additional 50,000 fans home who might not otherwise be inclined to do that? Because they might like it and not come back. And you know what? Across the board, throughout college football, that's kind of what we've seen since the 2020 season, when we returned to some version of normal in 2021 in full attendance. Really haven't had full attendance outside of a couple exceptions across college football, because some of those people who stayed home in 2020 decided to never return because they liked what they saw at home. So that was a concern. But there are a lot of things that factor into this. If you want to drill down more specifically to West Virginia, let's start with this. You got to win, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Winning will solve all attendance problems. Now you have to get a little more creative in terms of finding out, like we talk about lack of regional rivalries. If anything was lost with the Big 12, as necessary as it might have been, it was the lack of regional rivalries. Now we're trying to get some of those back on the schedule, and we've done a decent job of doing that. But there's a lot of things that contribute to it. But I think those are a couple that you would start the conversation with right there.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, you're right. It's the reason why it's one of the oldest cliches in the book, right? That winning cures all. And that is certainly part of the attendance conversation. All these different aspects are a part of the conversation. But I do think while winning is certainly important, this is even a struggle for, like, I think of LSU last year, Jed, right? First time that they were really back in the national picture since they won that title in 19 with Joe Burrow and all those guys.
Long 3 years, yeah.
It was, right, long 3 years. But by their standards, they were certainly 3 down years, right? You get Brian Kelly in this year, you go on a run, you end up beating Alabama late in the season. They hosted UAB at the end of the year when they were the number 6 team in the country. LSU did in November. And there were 10,000 empty seats there. Now there's still 80,000 people at the game, but that stadium holds 90,000, right? Or there's 82,000 there and it holds 92, whatever it is there at Tiger Stadium in Death Valley. So yes, winning makes a difference, because if LSU was stinking up the joint, maybe there's only 60,000 people there, right? Maybe there's only 50,000 people there, as opposed to the 80-some that showed up to watch them beat the crap out of UAB on a November Saturday. So winning is part of it, but it's still a challenge I mean, Nick Saban talks about attendance at Alabama football games, and that's Alabama. So it's something that everyone in sports is fighting. Certainly at the collegiate level, I think that's a big part of it, because a lot of these people too, Jed, I think, and I'm speaking from my personal experience here, but I know this is you as well too. How long does it take you to get to Mountaineer Field from where you live? One way.
Hour and a half.
About the same for me, about 90 minutes one way, right? Yeah. So when I'm going to Morgantown, that's 3 hours round trip for me. And that's not including, you might hit some game day traffic that might add an extra 20, 30 minutes, might take you a little bit longer to get out post game, all those different things. Like I think a lot of it too, for a lot of college universities, a lot of football programs that are located in Morgantown, West Virginia, in State College, right? In Tuscaloosa. They're not located in massive cities with massive populations. A lot of people commute far to go to those games as well too. And I think that plays into it at the college experience as well.
Southern West Virginia. A lot of folks come from Southern West Virginia. Or
the average WVU fan drives 2 to 3 hours. Yeah.
Yeah. And some people, that's a conservative estimate, but you hit on something there, Wes. We talked a minute ago about the high def experience at home, right?
And that's a huge part of it too.
There's nothing more high def than being in person, right? But it's not as though you can just tell Mr. Scott to beam you up and go straight from your living room to your seat at Mountaineer Field, right? You can't do that. I mean, there's a lot before and a lot after that you have to contend with. And the experience at home, I mean, let's face it, 5 minutes after the Mountaineer game's over, you're knee deep in the next game and another bowl of chips, right? So much different experience.
Or your nap, or you're taking a sad nap on the couch.
That's right. You're not in traffic in Suncrest, right? It's a whole different animal, right? So there's nothing better than the in-game experience. There's just nothing better than the in-game experience itself. In other words, I think
especially in college sports too.
Absolutely. Yeah. But the before and the after is sometimes a little problematic, a little bit of a hassle. Yeah. We talked about, the journey that some folks have to make. And so that's what you're competing against when you're trying to get people to, it's a sacrifice. It really is. You're sacrificing your day to do this. You could argue if you actually live in Morgantown proper, okay, you might be able to just sacrifice half a day, okay?
Right. Or you live in Clarksburg or Fairmont.
That's right. Yeah. Outside of that, it's a day. It's a Saturday. You're giving up your Saturday, okay? And in the case of college basketball, you're giving up whatever the better part of that half a day, okay, to come to that weeknight game or that Saturday, whatever the case might be. But the experience at home's great. Okay, it is. And high def and all the amenities of home. But there's nothing better than the experience within the stadium. But let's not fool ourselves and say that's all there is to it, is just the in-game experience. No, there's other baggage attached to it. And you have to find ways to streamline some of that as well. And if you want to enhance the fan experience, these are all things that you want to try and find ways to make a little more acceptable or easier, or however you want to look at it.
Yeah, it's a struggle at every level of sports right now. You're right. I'm with you. I'm a purist in this regard, right? I'm a 90s kid, so I was fortunate enough that I was kind of born at the tail end of old school, right? But I was young enough that I get a lot of this new school stuff as well too, being raised and growing up in the 90s. You're still right. To me, Jed, there's nothing like being at the game. And I don't care what the game is for you. I don't care if it's the Mountaineers in Morgantown on Saturday. I don't care if it's, the Green Bay Packers or the Boston Red Sox or the Miami Heat, whatever the game is for you. If you're a hockey fan like I am and you love going to a hockey game, there's nothing still to me that's like being at the game. I agree with you on that 100%. And I still feel that way even here where I'm almost 32 years old and not old, but certainly not young anymore. But I'll tell you, the home experience is certainly catching up year by year.
And the competition, it's like nothing says modern America more than not just options and not just abundant options, but overabundant options, right? Like
Correct.
I'm
Correct.
dating myself by saying this, but there's a reason that the last episode of MASH on February 28th, 1983 will forever hold that number. Okay.
Seinfeld doing crazy numbers.
Because
Yeah.
most households were limited to the number of things they could watch. But in the modern cable era, with cable penetration and digital platforms, you're just not going to approach those 1983 MASH finale numbers because there are so many options on television. If we went to, after a Little League baseball game when I was 10 years old, if we go down to the Dairy Queen or Charlie's Barn or a ice cream stand, every town in America has one, right? We'd all go down for our ice cream. Well, you really had three options back in the day. You had chocolate, you had vanilla, and a lot of times, if you're lucky, you had strawberry.
Twist.
Well, today's you got Baskin Robbins times 10, right? So that's true in sports. It's true in entertainment. So the competition is so much more abundant than it's ever been to draw people's attention away from their favorite sports team. So this is just the trend, not just in West Virginia, not just in the Big 12, but college football at large is dealing with a lot of these things. Now, we talked earlier, we like to believe winning solves everything. You punched a couple of holes in that, wisely so. Not always, right? Nick Saban.
It helps. Yeah.
Here's what I say. What winning does, it puts you in position to launch a compelling argument. In other words, until you do that, how compelling is your argument?
That's well said.
Right?
That's well said.
Once you start winning the games, like LSU when they turn the corner again, like Nick consistently does, how do you not listen to him? He's giving the fan everything they're asking for in terms of on the field.
Right.
So you need to listen to him. But until you get to the point that you are giving the fan those results, it's a hollow argument, right?
It certainly is. It certainly is. And it's an interesting one. It's nice to know that Ren Baker's cognizant of that. We will talk a little bit more about some of the other things that Ren Baker had to say here in a minute. But Jed, that transitions nicely into all these things that are constantly vying for your attention. A million different TV shows and streaming services now, all different kinds of sports and sports leagues. Well, the XFL, once again, one of those, as we had the return of the XFL, and some Mountaineers involved with the league, as you would imagine, some players out there, a couple former, I Bleav there were 4 Mountaineers in action over the course of week 1 there for the XFL in terms of players, but also pretty cool, Anthony Becht, head coach of the St. Louis Battlehawks, and he is now the head coach of the undefeated St. Louis Battlehawks. As Anthony Becht, 1-0 as a head coach. Pretty good start.
That's a really cool start. And not only that, but he was one of the more compelling stories, his team, with the way that game played out. I don't know if you at home were dialed into that or not, but it gives us a chance or a platform to talk about some of these interesting rules that the XFL has put in play. Now, what I like about leagues like the XFL or the USFL when it's in operation, it's kind of a petri dish. It's a testing ground, and let's see what works. Let's tinker with the rules. Nothing's perfect, including football. Now, sometimes the NFL and major college football can be a little too curmudgeonly, okay, and resistant to trying or tinkering with rules. So these platforms, these leagues, give you an opportunity to look at some things. So a couple things the XFL does, and we'll tell you how it impacted Anthony Becht's 1-0 start. They have a tiered point after touchdown system. In other words, you can go for one, a runner pass from the 2-yard line, which that's kind of quirky. You can go for 2 from the 5-yard line, but here's where it gets interesting. You can go for 3 from the 10-yard line. Okay. So a 3-point play. So what that means, a 9-point game in the XFL is a 1-possession game. Okay.
Oh yeah, that's true.
What happened with Anthony Becht, they were down 15-3 with just over a minute and a half to go. St. Louis was. They drove down, they scored, touchdown, 6-point touchdown. They cut the lead to 15-9. They decided to try and draw within a field goal to go for 3 from the 10. They successfully did so. They got the 3-point conversion. Now it's 15-12. So now let's go to another rule that they're tinkering with. There's no onside kicks because in the XFL, and I do think all of football is heading this way on some level. The XFL doesn't have true kickoffs, okay? In other words, one of the things that they'll do is the teams will begin playing 5 yards apart, the kicking team at the opponent's 35-yard line and the return team at the 30-yard line. Because I don't know if people recognize because the reason there are so many injuries on kickoffs are because of the velocity of kickoffs. When you have a dead 40 or 50-yard sprint and build up and put your big body like Owen Schmitt did back when he was in the NFL, we don't have the wedge busters anymore, but you still have high velocity contact in large numbers on these kickoffs. So to avoid that, the XFL said, hey, let's put them 5 yards apart. Now there's no 40 or 50-yard lead up sprints. There's still contact. We still have that part of the game. And then you're asking, well, how do you kick an onside kick if you're doing that? You can't. No, you can't. But this is something I've heard discussed probably for the better part of 15 years as an alternative to an onside kick. What's better than an onside kick? Who wants to see the kicker, okay, and the onside kick unit on the field with the game on the line and a possession at risk? You want to see the best players in the game.
Correct.
Keep the quarterback on the field, keep the offensive stars on the field, keep the defensive stars on the field. So what the XFL does is they have 1 4th and 15. So you have one down to gain 15 yards. And if you do so, okay, just like you recovered an onside kick, you get possession of the football again. That's what St. Louis did. So after scoring to make it 15-9, converting the 3-pointer to make it 15-12, they
converting the 4th and 15.
4th and 15, right? So now you can tinker with the 15 to see if 12 yards works better, 17 yards, whatever it might be. You might have to tinker with that number, but I like the idea of trying to do that. And there's a couple other things. Now, what they did was they converted, and then they drove right down with 15, 16 seconds to go and scored and actually won with a touchdown, 18-15. So great finish by Anthony Becht and his guys. But a couple things to talk about here. First of all, they also have what's called, they have a lot of transparency in the replay booth. I think that appealed to fans because we always kind of wonder behind the screen, a lot of cloak and dagger type stuff is suggested up in the replay booth. What are they doing? Why is it taking so long? What are they talking about? How can they not see what we see? They actually have transparency. Dean Blandino, longtime NFL official connected to the NFL, right? So he's in charge of their officiating. So you hear the live and active conversations that what they're looking at, why they do it, why they don't do it. I think that appealed to fans. So that might be something that college football or the NFL can kind of dip their toe into. And then I was thinking about this, Wes. Why not take it one step further? And I'll close with this. I like the idea of the 3-point play from the 10. Now, defensive coordinator is going to hate it, right? But I like it because if you're a fan, as I said earlier, a 9-point game with 48 seconds to go, you're not leaving the stadium.
Right.
You're sticking around to take one possession game. I say, let's take it one step further. Let's finalize it. Let's have a 4-point play. Now I can tell you how to do it. Okay. Here's where it really gets interesting. Okay. Here's my 4-point play. And this, you don't go further than that or you're getting crazy. Okay. Some people would say this is crazy enough, right? Now a 10-point game is a 1-possession game. You telling me league commissioners wouldn't like the idea of fans being captivated with 10-point games all the way to the bitter end? So here's what you do. I don't want to bump the ball any further than it is already back at the 10-yard line like it is on the 3-pointer. Okay. So the 3-point conversion attempt takes place on the 10. You know what you do? This would be my proposition to the XFL or whoever's listening. You know what you do on the 4-point conversion?
Take somebody off the field.
Ball on the 10. Close. The defense gets a 12th defender.
Oh.
Now, what I would love, and this is where the football geek in me would love it, I would love to see what different coordinators did with that 12th defender.
Sure.
Because they would deploy him so differently. I mean,
an extra safety, like an extra pass rusher.
Yes, you rush 3, chop up the front, and drop 9. I mean, there's so many different things you could do. And now that's not impossible to score against, but it's supremely difficult.
Pretty darn hard,
as it should be if you want 4 points off of it. Okay. Sure. So that would be the only thing that I would, the other wrinkle that I might add. Anyway,
and then you'd have debates about how much time should defensive coordinators spend on practicing with the 12th guy on the field.
Absolutely.
Should he be a pass rusher? Should he be a center fielder at the back?
Beautiful. It's so beautiful. And just imagine, I'm sitting there from a quarterback's perspective thinking, imagine how much tape you'd have to dig up just to get like 3 snaps of it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, seriously.
It'll be such a guessing game to try and prep for it. It'd be a thing. Can you imagine like Troy Polamalu?
Oh,
with 11 other guys on the field. It gets so entertaining to think that, you know?
Yeah, that's pretty good. I like that. That's good. We'll keep an eye on that. We'll see how that all plays out. I don't hate that idea by you. I
Yeah.
don't hate that idea. A
You got to
4-point
email
play
the
would
exit.
be.
Let's email the Rock.
Let's
Get him on the phone.
email the
right?
Rock. That's right. I'll tweet
Yeah.
him. We'll tweet
Drop
him from
Owen's
the
name.
from
He'll
the End the Gun
respond,
from
right?
the End the Gun
Yeah.
podcast. We'll add him. He'll respond to us for sure. This episode of ITG, episode 42, brought to you by our friends at GoMart, here to keep you going. Maybe Owen is stopping. I know he's stopping at GoMarts out there along his journeys throughout West Virginia. Make sure you sign up for your GoMart reward cards whenever you stop in. Speaking of rule changes, Jed, college football competition committee mauling some rule changes. And you know what? This actually plays nicely into both of our topics, the rule change topics for football that we just discussed and football attendance too, because make no mistake about it, these college football games now, the quick ones are over in 3.5 hours. The quick ones.
Yeah.
The longer games take 4 hours, sometimes even a little bit more, 3 hours and 50 minutes, 4 hours and 10 minutes, things like that. So, Jed, what's going on with the college football competition committee and some discussions about potential ways to speed up the games?
Well, the inspiration for this comes from two sides, from two ends. Okay. First of all, if you're talking about, not just talking about, but action's actually been taken now, they're expanding the playoffs so that for a handful of teams, at least, that's going to mean more football games. So they're almost approaching it like looking at it from, okay, let's start with the player safety standpoint. Okay. If you want to look at it from, I've heard the analogy made of pitch counts. Okay. Well, let's look at overall reps over the duration of a season. Okay. So instead of looking at it as individual games, let's look at it as reps over the course of a season. So if you're going to add a game or two for certain teams, can we at least cut into some of those per game reps so that at large numbers, not quite as hefty? So that's part of it. But the other part of it is too, a 3.5 hour game can sometimes wear on a fan depending on the nature of the game. Whether you're on hand in the stadium, okay, I mean, you can get a little restless, or even if you're sitting at home on the couch, again, other options kick in. So you want to keep the fan captive. You want to hit the sweet spot. Now, some people will say, I don't care, just give me as much football as possible. Well, that's true, but the numbers don't bear it out. Okay. What's suggested is like last year, I think they run the average duration, okay, on these games. It was 321, which is the longest it's been probably ever. Just a few years ago, it was like 317, 318. But here's some of the things they're looking at, because it's somewhat odd in the college game that when you think of any other sport, okay, when you think of, let's take basketball, for example, college basketball games are shorter than NBA games. High school basketball games are shorter than college games, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Well, college football games are not just no shorter than NFL.
Longer.
They're longer with more snaps.
Yep.
With more snaps. It's one thing to be longer on the clock. It's another thing to have more slugs. Okay. Rich used to call it 80 slugs, right? Well, it's another thing to have more slugs. So when you're looking at a game on average, if you count special teams or anything else, you're looking at somewhere in the ballpark of 185 or so snaps, okay, in a college game. All right. So how do you cut into that? Well, let's start with the obvious. Some of these things you're not even going to notice, okay? And first of all, they all need voted on. They all need debated. There's 4 of them that they're looking at. Point number 1, and I don't think there'll be much of a debate. I think it'll get passed without much thought. If there is a defensive penalty at the end of a quarter, typically what happens is there's an untimed down. Like let's say there's 3 seconds to go in the third quarter, and let's say there's a defensive penalty to replay that down. Okay, you would, with no time on the clock, replay that down. What they're saying now is, let's get rid of that. Let's start the fourth quarter with that play on a live clock. Nobody's going to argue that. Okay.
Unless probably it's the last play of the fourth quarter. That's the only way they'll do the untimed down.
Yes.
Gotcha.
So nobody's going to debate that much. Okay.
Yeah.
And then you get into, back-to-back timeouts. Now, people think first thing you think of is icing the kicker. Okay. It's not the only time it happens, but predominantly the NFL does have rules against these things.
They do.
Okay?
The NFL does.
So, and
can't
the funny
take back-to-back timeouts in the NFL.
When you study it, a lot of the data over the arc of time, because it's like anything else, players adjust to how the game's played, okay, and to the strategy involved in the game. So kickers and field goal units have now adjusted to the timeouts being taken. And what are they doing? They're turning into a free rep. Right. So now if you're going to take the time out to ice a kicker, you'll have to throw off the timing of when you'd normally take it and take it at a different time. So they can't get the live snap and the dry run and the free kick, the free practice kick for the live kick. What they've done is they've now figured out that depending on the range of the kick, unless it's a really long range kick, you actually have a better chance of making it if you're iced. A better chance. Because I think in part, at least, what we just said, you're getting the free kick, you're getting the dry run. So all of a sudden, the kicker's confidence is up. Now, old school thinking would suggest the last thing you want a kicker doing at any point is thinking, right? You want them reacting and just muscle memory. Go, muscle memory, muscle memory. You want them really looking around thinking, wow, all these fans and all these guys are on. You don't want them thinking
everyone's staring at me. Yeah.
But all that's happened is the dry run has resulted in better results for oftentimes.
Makes sense.
So again, I don't think that will be a very hot debate. It'll probably get passed. Now you get into the two more interesting ones. Okay. One of the interesting ones is when it comes to first downs outside of 2 minutes. Okay. You would almost adapt, the college game would almost adapt a quasi NFL model. Okay. Right now, there's a stoppage of play after a first down to reset the downs in college football. Okay. On the clock. In the NFL, there's obviously not. The NFL never stops the clock for a first down, irrespective of whether it's inside 2 minutes or not. Well, college is talking about, how about we change it and we don't stop the clock unless it's inside 2 minutes. Then it wouldn't impact your 2 minute drill and your comebacks and things like that. Okay.
Right.
Here's why I don't think it's, first of all, it would impact, I think, 7 or 8 plays a game, which is significant.
Yeah.
You're talking 180 some a game. Okay. That's significant. So over the arc of time, you're talking 85, 90 in a 12 game season. And then you got postseason. Okay. So that's what you're looking at. But here's what, a number of years ago, what college did, it used to matter a whole lot more. The NFL did this way back when, and college continued to do it beyond that. It used to be there was no 40-second clock. Okay.
Right.
There was no 40-second play clock. You had to rely on the officials. Okay. To truly reset the clock, blow the whistle, and start the only play clock, which was a 25-second clock. Now, the issue was there wasn't great uniformity to that. Okay. Sometimes the officials were fast. Sometimes they were slow. And if you're trying to mount a comeback, that's frustrating.
They're moving
right?
slow. Yeah.
So the NFL was the first to do it. And they said, look, why don't we just remove the officials from the equation? The second a play ends, the 40-second clock starts for the next play. Well, ultimately, college football adopted that part of it. So there's now a 40-second clock. So in terms of how fast you do or don't get to playoff, I don't think it would matter as much. Okay. It would just matter in terms of the overall game clock. So that's why I don't think it will be as impactful. But again, it would shave a few snaps away.
Sure.
Now there's people debating this, and I don't entirely understand the argument that, well, some offensive-minded coaches might respond just by going tempo the whole time. And now whatever snaps you save over the course of a game, they'll add to it, and it's a net, zero. Okay. I don't know about that, but again, I'm open to the notion of doing that. Now, rule proposition number 4, again, not passed. These are open for debate. Okay. And this one I hope is not passed. I don't have all the specifics on it, but what they're talking about doing is continuing to let the clock run after an incompletion. Now, to give this some frame of reference, at no level of football is that done.
Yeah.
Okay. All the way down to high school, the clock stops. Okay. I mean, the thing everybody keeps talking about is, what about spiking the clock or spiking the ball to stop it? You need to put some thought into that. Okay.
Yeah.
You need to put some thought into that. But in other words, you always ask yourself, how will rules be abused? Okay. Doubling back to what we talked about with the XFL. One of the things I didn't mention, and again, I go back and forth on this. One of the things the XFL is tinkering with is, yes, there's challenges, but I don't know if you saw this, Wes, but they have something they call a super challenge. Did you see this?
I didn't know.
The coach is allowed once a game to challenge any aspect of a play.
Okay.
So all the things that typically aren't challenge worthy,
like a hold or a face mask,
What they did in the game the other day was they challenged an offsides. They said, hey, they lined up offsides. Okay.
Sure.
So
illegal formation, false start.
I'll tell you right now, you know how I would use that? If I was a head coach and there was such a rule, again, I'm just thinking people abuse rules, right? I immediately think, you know how I'd use that? What do we always say about holding?
Every play
there's holding. So I would keep that in my pocket and only use it if a team scored on me in the final seconds of a game. And then I'm blindly throwing it out there. Hey, they held. And I'm just hoping
left guard was holding.
Yeah. There you go. Look at all 11 of them. You'll find somebody holding. That's how I would use it. Right.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful with trying to be a little too creative in terms of pushing the envelope.
Sure.
But do you really want to get to a point where incomplete passes don't stop the clock. I mean, there is a
No.
huge element of strategy involved in that. Even if you get to the point where you're saying, okay, except for the final two, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I mean, you
That's
got
not
plays
that's too far out of left field for me.
that to me, that's the one that will not only be contested, but hopefully fail.
Yeah.
Um,
I can't
so
see that
again, the
passing.
spirit or context of what they're trying to do here, I get it. I'm all about it. You want to shorten the game. Now, again, as an offensive minded guy, I mean, one of my thoughts is, wow, if you hold an offensive record, this is really good for news for you because you'll
Sure,
probably have it
sure.
forever.
Yeah.
You know, if you see what I'm saying, I mean, that's the kind of the way you think.
Yeah, sure.
But you want
We're
what's
running
best.
80 less plays a season, 90 less plays a season.
Well, there you go. So
yeah.
that's a game less. You know, that's a game and a half or something. If it's Army, that's a game and a half,
Sure,
right?
sure.
But I mean, Army's games are going to be 17 minutes long before it's over, you know. But so these are some of the things being. It's always an interesting time of year because the committees have these discussions. Sometimes they're passed, sometimes they're not. But it's all about exploring and sometimes making changes that are necessary. But you want to improve, obviously, player safety to the highest level possible, especially if you're talking about extensive snaps being added over the arc of time in a long season, maybe a 17-game season for some teams. But you also want to make it again, I'm dating myself, but the old Pirate pitcher Zane Smith. One of the smart things about Zane Smith was he recognized he worked a very quick game as a pitcher. I mean, his average game was like 206, or it was a short game. And the reason he always said he did it, he said, "Look, my defense is incredibly attentive. They're on their toes. I get better defense than anybody else in this rotation because of that." So there's also something to be said for that from a fan standpoint.
Sure.
If you're a little more crisp in terms of the overall college football experience, even if it's just by a couple minutes. And then, of course, we get into what I think needs addressed. If you want to shorten the games, let's talk about reviews, okay? Because for the life of me, I can't figure out. I mean, I work the game and I still don't entirely understand the metrics of how and when, you know? Why don't you put in place? I mean, look, there's some things that it's not an accident that the NFL is the multi-billion-dollar industry that it is, right? They get some things really right. And I think the review process is one of them. What the NFL does, as you know, Wes, every play within inside 2 minutes is reviewed, every scoring play is reviewed, and then you get the challenges for the coaches. Okay, so what that means is, let's take that for example. This is why I think it needs discussed in college. Let's say you have a situation where it's late in the first quarter and there's a penalty, and the outcome, it's either going to be 2nd and 5 or 2nd and 9, depending on the outcome. Okay, well, I say this: that sometimes will be reviewed and delay a game by 6 minutes, okay, because the crew upstairs looking at it. And my question's why. I mean, like, first of all, it's not my place to decide if that one play late in the first quarter is important enough to impact the overall outcome of the game. It's not my place. You know whose place it is? The coaches. Okay, so I want to put it in their hands. I'm not going to say that play doesn't matter. What I am going to say is, look, let the coach decide if it matters enough to stop the game to look at it. Let him decide. I'm not going to say, oh, it doesn't matter, it's in the first quarter. No, every play matters. Let the coaches decide, limit their opportunities to do this, just like in the NFL. And I think it'll shorten it too, because in college right now, I think the numbers are 2.3 challenges per game, 1 overturn per game. So what that means is everybody's going to think, well, it seems like there's a whole lot more. Well, that's because sometimes there are. Sometimes there's 5, 6, or 7. Sometimes there's 1 or 2. But on average, there's like 2 point some odd challenges per game, and 1's overturned. And the funny thing is, the more challenges there are, typically it still hovers around 1. Okay, being overturned. That number's more constant. Now you could give reasons or theories behind that, but I do think if you're trying to shorten a game by 5-10 minutes when it's 3:21 on average, you need to look at that too. You really do, because sometimes we've all been at games where the challenges did extend it by double digits.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
It would seem real simple to have a cap on that. Hey, you've got 45 seconds to look at the play under the hood, make a decision. If it's not an obvious, egregious mistake or miss, you stick with the call on the field and you keep it moving.
It reaches a certain point where obvious should mean obvious, right?
Correct.
And if it's truly obvious and egregious, then it shouldn't take more than whatever time's decided on, right?
The amount of time that it takes your grandmother sitting on the couch next to you to go, "Oh yeah, that wasn't a catch." That's as long as it should take. That's about as long as it should take. Yeah. So listen, I've been complaining that college football games are too long since I was in college. over a decade ago, a decade ago. And they've only gotten a little bit longer over the years. So I'm interested to keep an eye on this. But yeah, let's just go ahead and scrap the run the clock after incompletions. We can go ahead and scrap that right off the top there. Throw that one in the trash heap. This episode of ITG also brought to you in part by our friends at Fortis.
You know what it almost makes me think? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Wes.
Well, I was just going to say Fortis, roof performance and financial security guaranteed. Visit fortis.us.com.
Our good friends at fortisus.com.
That's right.
What it makes me think is it almost makes me think like, okay, let's say you're somebody on the committee and you're really trying to angle to get that Proposition 3 passed about the first downs. Okay. And you're like, you know what? Maybe to get this passed, let me throw something outrageous in the mix. And you know what I'm saying? And
everyone will scoff. Everyone will scoff at that.
And all of a sudden, that number 3 looks a little more sensible, right? So I promise you, at these exotic locations,
that's true.
They fly off too. Yeah.
That is part of it. That's a good one. That's a good one. Well, Jed, as we wrap up this edition of ITG, our new fearless leader, Ren Baker, speaking this week. Anything that the boss man said stand out to you?
A lot of interesting stuff. He's 60 days in. He sat down with Tony, Mr. Caridi, our friend, and I took some notes on it. He's to the point now. In other words, he's been traveling around the state, traveling around the campus, and having sit downs with fans, with administrators, with secretaries, with a little bit of everybody, trying to gather as much broad information from broad groups as he can. Sometimes he'll spend half hour, 60 minutes. I found it interesting that he said, hey, we're also going to bring some outside groups in to dig even deeper because we really want to get to the bottom of what's needed, okay? Because he wants to prioritize and start building a plan. Well, one of the things he talked about was revenue streams, okay? And this is where the reality set in. In other words, he talked about revenue streams and growth projections. He said, I want to be realistic about what we project or anticipate as growth in our current revenue streams. Okay. First of all, I want to be realistic there. But he talked about facility and fan enhancements. Okay. He said they'll share a streamlined, more high level version of the plan that they put together with the public. I would imagine at some point relatively soon, probably in the next couple of months. That's me guessing. And Tony asked him, he said, hey, what caught you off guard the most settling into this seat, first couple of months in this job, traveling the way you've traveled, shaking the hands you shake, kissing the babies? What surprised you the most? Okay. And he said, it's one thing to hear it from the outside looking in about the depth of passion and just how statewide it truly is with this brand. He said, but until you get here and experience it and have these conversations, I don't truly think that you do appreciate it. You really can't comprehend it. And truly how much the university means to the quality of life to the people in the state. It's so directly tied. He said, I think you lack an analogy. Every college, he said, every college, athletic department in the country thinks they have very unique problems or very unique situations. He said, but really, he said, I've been in enough places to know that a lot of them are kind of similar. Okay. He said, but here, this is a different situation. He said, maybe you can make an argument that Arkansas has some parallels to West Virginia as the only brand with no pro brands in the state. He's like, when I was at Missouri has a statewide presence. Okay. No doubt about it, the Tigers do. He said, but there's Chiefs fans, there's Royals fans, there's obviously Cardinals fans. There's other things penetrating and grabbing the interest of those Missouri fans. But so he talked about that. And he said, look, the truth is we have to grow the budget. Okay. And this is where it got interesting. He said, I'll push for efficiency, but we need to find ways to create more revenue. He said, I understand that this state is all about doing more with less. He said, but let's try and see what we can do to impact that less part of it. Okay. You want the results to be the same, but he said, here's the reality. We have a bottom third budget in the Big 12. Okay. And debt service payments and travel costs that are at the top of the league. Okay, so bottom third budget, debt service costs and travel budget or expenses, they're at the top of the league. He said that gives us less than the rest of the conference to operate on. He said, now you can't expect to finish first under those circumstances unless you can change it with additional, the allocation of additional resources. He wants to come up with ways to do that. And it almost brought out the old D2 coach in me. Okay. When we were at Glenville having pie sales and spaghetti dinners and car washes. And that's where it went. And I thought, you know what fits West Virginia in the modern era of Power 5 college football more so than that, because it's really going to take some outside the box thinking, right? And he said this is probably where he's spending maybe most of his time, is what outside the box ways can they come up with to generate some revenue. And he gave an example. He said, take our facilities, for example. He said, I think we need to consider versatility when it comes to our facilities. Okay. He said, for instance, why can't the Coliseum host wedding receptions or birthday parties? He said, now, if you can make $100,000 a quarter doing that, that adds up. He said, when you're trying to come up with $100,000 doing this and $100,000 doing that, he said, next thing you know, you have $1 million on your hand, and that's significant. That's significant. That's impacting the bottom line. That's making us more competitive. That's getting closer to reaching our goals. Okay, in terms of what we can do with each department or with each team. He said, now, when he was in North Texas, their goal was to get their programs operating in the top half of their league. Okay, and he said, then once we succeeded in doing that, well, we wanted to continue to strive, so we tried to get it to the top quarter of our league. You always want to try and be ambitious enough to get better and improve. You always want to push yourself, okay? You always want to push yourself. And I remember, when Coach Rodriguez was here, he used to have this list of things, his dream list. He would, I'm calling it that. He wouldn't call it another name for it, but he'd keep it in his wallet. He had 5 things that he always wanted for the program, okay? That he always wanted. They were like reach goals, okay? And he would always push the administration to get these things, okay? And once in a while, one of the 5 things, after a long battle, the program would get one of these 5 things. Sure. You know what he'd do? Scratch it off and add another one and stay at 5. And that's kind of what it sounded like he was talking about here, he said, now this is where, from a bean counter standpoint, the accounting side of it can sometimes, the words accounting and interesting shouldn't live in the same universe, but on some level they can be. And here's what he said. He said, there are 2 kinds of debt when you look at accounting, okay? There's accrued deficits, which is completely different, okay? But there's also what they call facility debt service, okay? And here's, from a facility debt service standpoint, he said this can sometimes be good debt. For instance, suites, clubs, they might have service debt. Let's say you put new luxury suites in, and it's $5 million a year. And the example he gave, but he said, no, that's not what we're doing right now. But that's just the example he gave. He said, but you're making $10 million a year. Well, that's a good debt, because it's making money. He said, so from when you consider the 2 kinds of debt, moving forward, like for instance, the Pushkar Center renovations, they were necessary to work us toward being competitive, but they don't really have an ROI on them. You know what I mean? You're not making money off of that directly as a revenue stream.
Right.
So he said, and moving forward, as we look to the future and future debt, we want it to have a dedicated revenue stream tied to it. That's one way to directly improve. And then finally, what he talked about was, and of course, he's going to play this pretty close to the vest, but he was asked by Tony about Big 12 expansion. And he just talked about how aggressive Brett Yormark is. And there's a lot of truth to that. We've seen that. I mean, Brett Yormark was very public about his 3-pronged plan. Okay. Prong number 1 was to address the TV deal for the Big 12. Well, look at that. I'd say it exceeded expectations based on the loss of Texas and Oklahoma. Point number 2, or priority number 2, was to address the Oklahoma and Texas situation. Again, he did so. And it kind of probably came as close to making us whole in his effort as you could hope, right? Well, priority number 3 on his list, and based on what we saw to the first 2, I'd say we can expect action or news forthcoming, from now into the summer. And that's on aggressive efforts at Big 12 expansion. Now, what's that going to look like? I mean, we could have those conversations all the live long day, but he pointed out that the Big 12 was on life support not that long ago. I mean, I've now seen Big 12 on life support twice in the better, maybe a decade, right?
Sure.
But, yeah. So he said now it's kind of firmly entrenched as the 3rd strongest league in big boy, college sports. So now there will be a part 2 to this conversation with Tony, but there was a lot to chew on in that first part. It was a lot of good stuff, and you get the sense that Ren's settling in. His family's still in Texas.
Okay.
They're not moved up here yet. He's only had the time to even look at a couple homes. He
Sure.
said
Sure.
it's worked out pretty well. I want them to finish the school year, and it's put me in position to really focus and dive right in, because they always talk about the first 100 days mattering, whether
Sure.
it's a presidency, whether you're an athletic director. You always want to focus on the first 100 days and what kind of change you can affect or efforts you can make. But I mean, the infrastructure is relatively strong. Again, you're starting from a position of strength. It's nice to step in and say, again, based in part on what Shane did. You look at the facilities on the football
Football
side.
stadium's just been
There you go.
renovated.
You don't have to say,
Coliseum's just
"Wow,
been renovated.
we have to
Yeah.
address that first, and
They
then get
just
to the
got a
money
new
making
baseball
side of it."
stadium,
There you
what,
go.
4 or 5 years
So
ago?
that's right. So you can look at those things and say, "All right, now that those are done for now." Okay, I always say that cranes matter more to recruiting than anything. So at some point, you're going to have to renovate again and do this and that. But the facilities are in pretty decent shape, more so than they've ever been from a competitive standpoint.
Yeah.
Now that
Yeah.
changes. That's very dynamic. It changes every year.
Sure.
But it's nice for him to step in as an AD and not have to immediately address that to be competitive. So now he can focus more readily on things that might actually create revenue and generate some of the money that he's talking about. When you have a bottom third budget, but you want to have or aspire to have top third goals, well, you have to find realistic ways to bring those two things closer together. And what you want to do is bring the revenue closer to the goals. So maybe, Wes, I don't know, we might have, hopefully we're going to get invited to a wedding reception at the
There you
Coliseum
go. There
one
you
summer
go.
or
Hey,
something.
pay
I
a
was
couple
thinking about that.
pay a couple
That's
hundred
kind of
bucks
cool.
extra. Pay a couple $100 extra, and Big O will show up and shotgun a beer.
That's right. That's
There you
right.
go.
Well, he might pay a couple $100 just to do that, right? But I was thinking about that, Wes, and I was thinking that's kind of neat. I mean, wouldn't it be neat for a big birthday party, a bunch of kids to be? I don't know what they're talking about. Would they be on the floor at the
Playing
Coliseum?
playing hoops out at the Coliseum. Yeah, the
That'd be kind of
Mountaineer would
neat.
probably come by and fire off the musket.
Who knows? Again, I'm just thinking out loud here. I have no idea what specifics they're looking at, but I'm thinking to myself, I promise you, there's some people from a wedding reception standpoint that would find it appealing to be inside the facility overlooking Mountaineer Field and
Yeah.
have it in there. It's what I mean. So it's a lot of fodder, a lot of interesting conversation pieces that came out of that with Tony and Ren.
Yeah. And we'll be looking forward to part 2. Obviously, keep an eye out for that. But it's interesting, I think, to always hear people that are in positions of, authority and have the real obvious ability to affect change and kind of where their mindset is at. And always enjoy hearing that from Ren Baker. And like I said, we'll be looking forward to part 2 here soon.
Yeah.
Jed, I think that'll do it for us here today. A final thank you to our friends at Toothman Ford. We all know cars cost less in Grafton. Make sure you're checking out their website for a great way to peruse all the great inventory there at Toothman Ford. Jed, this was fun. Good conversation here today. And next week I'll be at the Combine, so hopefully we'll have some good stuff. I'm waiting to see. They still haven't posted schedules yet, but I'm waiting to see when defensive line media availability is going to be, when wide receiver is. Hopefully, like I said, I'll be able to get a couple minutes with Dante, a couple minutes with Bryce, get us some content here for the show. But I mean, worst case scenario, I'll come back with some good stories.
I got some Packer folks reaching out to me about Bryce. They're doing some production. He's on the receiver list, and
nice.
What happens is every couple of years, like a few years ago was the Giants. It seems like they're trying to target in on a certain position that maybe we have somebody that's a candidate.
Right.
But I can't believe it's already here. You're going to be in Indy next week. That's nuts.
I'm going to be in Indy a couple of days, Monday. Yeah. So always a lot of great stories. I mean, Indianapolis, I have seen the things that I have seen, folks. I've seen Andy Reid eating a cheeseburger at 1 a.m. That's not a joke. I have seen Jerry Jones get on his private bus to go 2 blocks down the street because he didn't want to have to walk 2 blocks down the street. That is a real story, not a personal joke. I've seen Jason Garrett lie to people about who he is in the elevator. I've seen a lot of funny things. I saw one time a kid take a selfie with Ron Rivera, and then after he took the picture with him, said, "Wait a second, who are you again?" I mean, it's a lot of fun.
Was it a kid or was it Eric Bieniemy?
was a teen. I say kid. It was more like a teenager, probably, 14, 15, 16, somewhere in that range. But yeah, combine, always pretty cool. Hopefully I'll be able to catch up with some Mountaineers. Our buddy Sean Mariner's not going to be there. That's one of the things that I like about going to the combine usually. Sean's there for a couple days with the WVU guys as well too, and we get to go out and have some dinner and have some cold ones. But Sean will not be there this year, but I'll do my best to track down some Mountaineers, and we'll see what happens at the combine. But we got things moving and shaking there, Jed. Some combine for our boys, free agency not long after that. What's going to happen with Geno Smith? So, plenty to keep our eyes on here in the scope
David
of Mountaineer
Long,
football.
I saw his
David Long too. That's a great one.
$60+ million. That's so
4 years, $68 million. That'd be a nice payday for the guy. I tell you.
I saw it projected in some circles. Yeah,
maybe
right.
Maybe he can help out Ren Baker with some of that revenue stream.
Yeah, maybe.
I'm just kidding, David. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Make sure you're following along with us on YouTube if you want to see our beautiful mugs in the gun podcast. That's where we're at on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram as well too. ITGfootball.com. And as always, the thing we ask of you is to be an ear and tell an ear about your favorite WVU football podcast. Thanks for listening to this edition of ITG. We'll talk to you next week, where a third of the show will be live from fabulous Indianapolis, Indiana. For Jed Drenning and on assignment Owen Schmitt, I'm Wesley Uhler. You've been in the gun.